Alright, let's move into the lab section for network address translation. If you hadn't already, go ahead and go to the link in the video description below and download this so that you can practice for yourself or follow along with us. The purpose of this lab is to configure port forwarding and some dynamic path. Essentially, company B over here wants its web server to be accessible to users over the internet, and company A on this side wants its users to be able to access the internet. So our tasks, one says, while in simulation mode, perform a ping test from PC0 to the external interface of router B at 10.3.104.8. What happens to the packet? So we're going to go ahead and come down here to the bottom right and click on simulation mode. Then we're going to come over here to PC0. Go ahead and hit top so that doesn't disappear. Look at that address that we're going to ping again. So it says we need to ping 10.3.104.8. We hit enter. Everything's going to pause for a second right here. You can see our packet has been generated at our computer. And if we hit this right button, then we can follow it across the network. Looks like it gets to our switch, then it gets to router A, then it gets sent to router B, and it looks like router B is dropping. So that's not the behavior that we want. So let's go ahead and exit out of simulation mode and go back to real time. And let's move on to task number 2. Task 2 says use the web browser of the PC in company A to try and access the web server of company B at https 192.168.0.3. What web server did you access? So we see this web server in company B is 192.168.0.3. Let's come into our computer, go over to our web browser. And once that pops up, we'll go https://192.168.0.3. Enter. And it looks like we have hit a web server, but it says company A web server. So that's our web server. So looks like our web server has that same private IP address. And this is one of the issues that you can run into with private IP addresses because they're not unique across the internet. So even though I was trying to get to company B's, I actually have the exact same IP address in my network. So that's where network address translation is going to come into play, and you'll see that later. So task number 3 says configure port forwarding on router B. So company B's web server can be accessed on port 443, then verify the NAT configuration. So if we hop into router B over here, we're going to go ahead and hop into global configuration mode. The first thing we want to do when setting up NAT is define our inside and outside interfaces. So if we hop into interface G001, that's going to be our inside interface. So we go IP NAT inside. Then we'll hop into interface S010, which is our outside interface. We'll go IP NAT outside. So that's the first step. Exit out of that mode. Now we're going to go ahead and configure our static NAT or our static path for port forwarding. So we'll say IP NAT inside source static. Protocol is going to be TCP. We'll go 192.168.0.3, so that address of our web server on port 443. Go ahead and translate that to our public address of 10.3.104.8 on the same port 443. Enter. And if we pop out of here, we can run our show command, show IPNAT translations. And we can see that we've configured that static NAT so that we'll translate any request that hits our port or our device at 10.3.104.8 on port 443. We'll go ahead and push that into our network on 192.168.0.3 on the same port. So we can move on now to our next task, which is task number 4. It says configure dynamic path on router A so devices in company A can access the internet. Assume the local addresses are the entire internal network, and assume the global addresses include 1010.243.100 to 1010.243.110. We're supposed to notice that there's not as many global addresses as local ones, so we're going to need to overload this. So if we hop into router A, we'll go ahead and enable, hop into global configuration mode. just like before, the first thing we're going to do is define our inside and outside interfaces. So we'll hop into G001 and say IPNAT inside, and then we'll go into interface S010 IPNAT outside. Exit out of that mode. Now we're going to define an access list that represents our internal or private addresses in our network that we want to get translated. So we'll go access list 1 permit 192.168.0.0.0.0.255. Then we're going to define a pool for those global addresses that we want these to be translated into. So we'll go IPNAT pool, we'll call it local. Then it'll be 10.10.243.100 all the way to 10.10.243.110 with a net mask of 255.0.0.0. Enter. And the final step is to configure our type of NAT. So we'll go IPNAT inside, and our source is going to be list 1, and our pool is going to be the local pool that we specified. And we're going to go ahead and overload this because we don't have enough global addresses to cover all these private ones. So we're going to need to associate some ports with them so that they can all be translated. We'll hit enter. Go ahead and hop out of that, and we won't be able to see the NAT translations yet, but if we send some traffic later, we will be able to look at them. So let's hop out of here and move on to task number 5. So task 5 says verify that PC0 can successfully ping router B's external interface. And then we're going to review the NAT translations that occurred on router A. So if we hop into PC0, into our command prompt, we'll issue that ping command 10.3.104.8. And this time we are successfully getting a reply back from that external router interface. So if we hop back into router A, now we can issue our show IPNAT translations command. And it looks like for that PC address of 192.168.0.4, for each of those ping commands that went out, it went ahead and gave it one of our public global IP addresses that we told it to, and it looks like each time they got a different port associated with them. So now we can go ahead and move on to step number 6, and that says verify that PC0 can successfully reach company B's web server at https 10.3.104.8. So we hop into PC0 again, we go back to our web browser, and we type https://10.3.104.8, which is actually the IP address of the router interface for company B. But remember, we overloaded it with PAT to pass any traffic hitting it on port 443, which is HTTPS, into its network to that server that they have. So if we go here, we do indeed reach company B's web server. So that was a brief overview on network address translation and the different ways that you can use it to allow your local network devices to reach the internet, as well as other devices to reach into your network via port forwarding to servers that you might have. I hope that you were able to get something out of this video, and I hope that you can use this in your future in networking, and we'll see you in the next video.